The stage robbery happened so fast that Clara Foster barely remembered the screams before the gunfire started, but 3 months later, she still heard them every single night when she closed her eyes. She stood at the window of the boarding house in Park City, Utah, watching the September sun rise over the mountain peaks in 1882, her fingers trembling against the glass as exhaustion made her vision blur. Sleep had become her enemy, a dark territory she could not enter without reliving those terrible moments when the masked men had stopped their coach on the road from Salt Lake City, when her parents had tried to protect the strongbox they were transporting for the mining company, when everything had ended in blood and dust. "Miss Foster, you look terrible," Mrs. Henderson said from the doorway, her round face creased with concern. The boarding house owner had been kind these past weeks, but even kindness could not chase away the nightmares that waited behind Clara's eyelids. "I am managing," Clara said, though her reflection in the window told a different story. At 22 years old, she looked a decade older, with dark circles under her green eyes and a gauntness to her cheeks that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Her auburn hair, once her vanity, now hung in a simple braid because she lacked the energy for anything more elaborate. Mrs. Henderson sighed. "You cannot keep going like this. Perhaps you should see Dr. Morrison again." "Laudanum does not help," Clara said quietly. "It only makes the dreams more vivid." She had tried the doctor's medicine once and woken screaming so loudly that half the boarding house had come running. The drug had trapped her in the nightmare, unable to wake even as she watched her mother fall again and again. "Then perhaps you need a change of scenery," Mrs. Henderson suggested. "My cousin runs a ranch about 15 miles south of here. They need someone to help with correspondence and bookkeeping. The mountain air might do you good, and it would get you out of this room." Clara turned from the window. The idea of leaving Park City, of going somewhere her parents had never been, held an unexpected appeal. Perhaps in a new place she could sleep without their ghosts waiting for her. "I would need to think about it." "Do not think too long, dear. You will waste away to nothing if you continue like this." Mrs. Henderson left, and Clara returned to watching the sunrise, wondering if she would ever feel truly rested again. That afternoon, desperation drove her outside. The boarding house walls felt too close, the bed too dangerous with its promise of nightmares. Clara walked through Park City's busy streets, past the saloons and general stores, past the mining company offices where her father had once worked. The September air carried the first hints of the coming autumn, crisp and clean at this elevation. She walked without destination, simply moving to keep her exhausted body from collapsing. She found herself at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open rangeland. A corral stood nearby, and several men were working with horses. Clara stopped to watch, grateful for any distraction from her own thoughts. One man in particular caught her attention. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting. He moved around a skittish black horse with a patience that bordered on reverent, never rushing, never forcing, just waiting for the animal to trust him. "That is Tanner Gaines," a voice said beside her. Clara turned to find a boy of perhaps 14 watching her. "He is the best horse handler in 3 counties. That black mare there killed a man last year, but Tanner says she can be gentled." "Killed someone?" Clara asked, her stomach twisting. "Kicked him in the head when he tried to break her ruff," the boy said matter-of-factly. "But Tanner does not break horses. He says you have to earn their trust." Clara watched as Tanner approached the mare again, speaking words too soft for Clara to hear. The horse's ears flicked toward him, and after a long moment she allowed him to touch her neck. His hands moved gently along her dark coat, and even from a distance Clara could see the care in every gesture. "He has been working with her for 2 months now," the boy continued. "Says she just needs someone to show her that not all humans will hurt her." The words struck something deep in Clara's chest. She stood watching until the sun began to set, until Tanner finally left the corral and the black mare stood calmly eating hay. As Clara walked back to the boarding house, she felt something she had not experienced in 3 months, a moment of peace that had nothing to do with her own suffering. That night, predictably, she could not sleep. She lay in bed until midnight, then rose and dressed, pacing her small room like a caged animal. Finally, unable to bear the confinement, she slipped out of the boarding house and walked through the dark streets. Park City was never fully silent, not with the mines running at all hours, but at this time of night, most respectable people were asleep. Clara found herself walking back toward the edge of town, toward the corral where she had spent the afternoon. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to cast shadows. She could see the dark shape of the mare moving restlessly in the enclosure. Clara leaned against the fence, watching the horse, envying her freedom to move without the weight of memory. "Cannot sleep either?" Clara gasped and spun around. Tanner Gaines stood a few feet away, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 27 or 28, with gray eyes that reflected the moonlight and a face marked by sun and wind. "I apologize," Clara said quickly. "I did not mean to trespass. I was just walking." "No trespass," Tanner said easily. "I am often out here at night myself. Nightingale there does not sleep much either." He nodded toward the black mare. "Nightingale?" Clara asked. "That is a gentle name for a horse with her reputation." Tanner smiled slightly. "Names have power. Call something savage and it will be savage. Call it beautiful, and maybe it will remember how to be beautiful." He moved to lean against the fence beside Clara, maintaining a respectful distance. "I saw you watching this afternoon." "I hope that was all right," Clara said. "I found the work you do fascinating." "Most people think I am wasting my time," Tanner said. "They say a horse that is killed should be put down, but Nightingale only defended herself against cruelty. That does not make her a killer, it makes her a survivor." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, unexpectedly. "And you think survivors can be healed?" Tanner looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara had the uncomfortable feeling he could see straight through to her battered soul. "I think survivors carry their scars, but those scars do not have to define their whole lives. Healing takes time and patience, though. You cannot rush it." "What if time does not help?" Clara whispered. "Then you need something more than time," Tanner said gently. "You need purpose, or companionship, or sometimes just someone willing to keep watch while you rest." Clara realized her hands were shaking. She gripped the fence rail harder, trying to steady herself. "I am Clara Foster," she said, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own vulnerability. "Tanner Gaines," he replied, "though I suppose you already knew that." "The boy this afternoon was informative," Clara admitted. "That would be Jack. He has ambitions of becoming a horse trader." Tanner shifted his weight, and Nightingale whickered from across the corral. "How long has it been since you slept properly?" The question was so direct that Clara almost laughed. "How did you know?" "I recognize the signs," Tanner said. "I went 2 years barely sleeping after the war." "You fought?" Clara asked. "Scout for the Union," Tanner said. "Spent most of my time behind Confederate lines, gathering information. After a while, I couldn't sleep without expecting someone to slit my throat in the dark." He spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "Took a long time to feel safe enough to close my eyes." "What helped?" Clara heard the desperation in her own voice. Tanner was quiet for a moment, considering. "Honestly, working with the horses. They do not care about the past. They only care about the present moment, whether you are treating them well or poorly right now. It forced me to stay in the present, too." He glanced at her. "What happened to you, Miss Foster?" Clara found herself telling him about the stage robbery, about watching her parents die, trying to protect money that did not even belong to them, about the nightmares that came every time she closed her eyes. She had not told anyone the full story since giving her statement to the sheriff, but something about Tanner's steady presence made the words pour out. When she finished, Tanner did not offer empty platitudes or false comfort. He simply said, "That is a heavy burden to carry alone." "I do not have much choice," Clara said, wiping her eyes. "My parents are gone, and I have no other family. Mrs. Henderson has been kind, but she has her own concerns." "What will you do?" Tanner asked. Clara thought of Mrs. Henderson's suggestion. "There is a ranch south of here that needs a bookkeeper. I am considering taking the position, though the idea of being even more isolated frightens me." "The Rocking H," Tanner said immediately. "Henry and Martha Henderson run a good operation. They treat their people fairly." He paused. "I am actually heading down there myself tomorrow. Henry asked me to come work with some of their horses. They have a few problem animals that need gentling." "How long would you be there?" Clara asked, then felt foolish for asking. But Tanner did not seem to find the question odd. "A month, maybe 6 weeks depending on the horses. Henry mentioned he might want me to stay on permanent if things work out well." He looked at her steadily. If you took that position, you would not be entirely alone. And if the nights are bad, if you cannot sleep, I could keep watch while you rest." Clara's breath caught. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Tanner said. "I know you are hurting, and I know what it is like to hurt in that particular way. No one should have to stand guard against their own mind without help." He straightened from the fence. "Think about it. The offer stands regardless." He walked back toward the corral, and Clara watched him check on Nightingale one more time before disappearing into a small cabin at the edge of the property. She stood alone in the moonlight for a long time before walking back to the boarding house. That night, she still did not sleep, but for the first time in 3 months, she felt a small spark of something that might have been hope. The next morning, Clara told Mrs. Henderson she would take the position at the Rocking H Ranch. Mrs. Henderson was delighted, and within hours Clara's few possessions were packed into a small trunk. A wagon arrived just after noon, driven by a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. "Henry Henderson," he introduced himself. "You must be Miss Foster. Martha is looking forward to having another woman around the place. It gets lonely with just us ranch hands for company." Clara climbed onto the wagon seat, and they rolled out of Park City as the afternoon sun beat down on the dusty road. She saw Tanner riding alongside them on a sturdy bay horse, leading 2 other mounts. He tipped his hat to her, but kept his distance, and Clara appreciated his discretion. She was not ready to explain their midnight conversation to anyone else. The ride to the Rocking H took about 3 hours. The landscape changed as they traveled south, the mountains giving way to rolling hills covered in autumn grass. Henry talked easily about the ranch, about the cattle they raised and the horses they bred. "We run about 300 head of cattle and usually have 20 to 30 horses at any given time," he explained. "Martha handles most of the household, and we have 6 regular hands plus a few seasonal workers. You will be handling the books, correspondence, and supply orders. Nothing too complicated, but it needs to be done regular and accurate." "I can manage that," Clara said, grateful for the prospect of useful work. Her father had taught her mathematics and accounting, skills unusual for a woman, but invaluable now. The Rocking H Ranch appeared as they crested a hill. The main house was a sprawling structure of weathered wood, with a wide porch wrapped around 3 sides. Several outbuildings clustered nearby: a barn, a bunkhouse, a cookhouse, and various sheds. Corrals spread out beyond the buildings, and Clara could see cattle grazing in distant pastures. Mountains rose in the background, their peaks already touched with snow. "Home," Henry said with obvious pride. "We built most of this ourselves over the past 15 years. Started with nothing but a land claim and a lot of determination." A woman emerged from the house as they pulled up. Martha Henderson was perhaps 10 years younger than her husband, with gray-streaked brown hair and a sturdy build that spoke of years of hard work. Her smile was genuine as she helped Clara down from the wagon. "You poor dear, you look exhausted," Martha said immediately. "Let me show you to your room. You will have the small bedroom off the main house. It has a window facing the mountains, and I think you will find it comfortable." The room was indeed small but clean and bright, with a comfortable bed, a washstand, and a desk by the window. Clara's trunk was brought up, and Martha left her to settle in with promises of supper in an hour. Clara unpacked slowly, exhaustion dragging at her limbs. She had not slept the previous night, and the wagon ride had drained what little energy she had left. But when she looked at the bed, her stomach twisted with familiar anxiety. She forced herself to focus on other tasks. She washed her face and hands, changed into a clean dress, and brushed out her hair. When she looked in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized herself. Her face had grown so thin, her eyes so haunted. She looked like a ghost of the person she had been before the robbery. Supper was held in a large dining room where the ranch hands ate together with Henry and Martha. Clara counted 8 people besides herself and the Hendersons. The men were polite, tipping their hats and introducing themselves. Tanner sat at the far end of the table, and Clara noticed he spoke little, mostly listening to the others talk about the day's work and the coming winter preparations. The food was simple but plentiful: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Clara forced herself to eat, knowing she needed the strength even though her appetite had vanished months ago. Martha watched her with concerned eyes, but did not comment. After supper, Henry took Clara to a small office off the main room. "This is where we keep all the records," he explained, showing her ledgers filled with detailed entries about cattle sales, supply purchases, and wage payments. "Martha has been managing it, but she is needed elsewhere, especially with winter coming. If you could take over starting tomorrow, that would be a great help." Clara looked through the ledgers, appreciating the neat handwriting and organized system. "I can do this," she assured Henry. "My father taught me bookkeeping." "Martha mentioned you lost your parents recently," Henry said gently. "I am very sorry for your loss." Clara swallowed hard. "Thank you." Henry seemed to sense her reluctance to discuss it further. "Well, I will leave you to get settled. If you need anything, just ask. We are informal here, and everyone helps everyone else." Clara returned to her room as darkness fell. She tried to read a book she had brought, but the words swam before her tired eyes. Finally, she changed into her nightgown and forced herself to lie down on the bed. Her heart immediately began to race. She stared at the ceiling, fighting the anxiety that came with closing her eyes. Hours passed. Clara heard the ranch settle into sleep, the sounds of men retiring to the bunkhouse, the dogs barking once before falling silent. The moon rose outside her window, casting pale light across the floor. She got up and paced, then lay down again, then got up once more. By midnight, she was nearly in tears from frustration and exhaustion. A soft knock on her door made her freeze. "Miss Foster?" Tanner's voice was quiet, barely audible. "Are you awake?" Clara opened the door a crack. Tanner stood in the hallway, fully dressed despite the late hour. "I saw your light," he said simply. "Thought you might be struggling." "I cannot do this," Clara whispered, the words breaking free. "I am so tired, but every time I close my eyes, I see them dying." Tanner glanced down the hallway, then back at her. "Get dressed and come outside. Sometimes a change of location helps." Clara quickly pulled a dress over her nightgown and followed Tanner through the quiet house. He led her out to the porch and settled into one of the rocking chairs positioned there. Clara sat in another, wrapping her arms around herself against the night chill. "When I could not sleep after the war," Tanner said quietly, "I used to go to the barn and sleep with the horses. Something about their presence made me feel safe, like they would warn me if danger was coming." "Did it work?" Clara asked. "Eventually," Tanner said. "I started with just an hour here and there, and gradually I could sleep longer. It took time, but I got there." He looked at her seriously. "The trick is not to fight the fear. You have to accept that right now, sleep feels dangerous, so you find ways to make it feel safe again." "How?" Clara asked, hearing the desperation in her voice. "You need someone you trust to keep watch," Tanner said. "Someone who can assure the frightened part of your mind that you are protected while you rest." Clara stared at him. "You are offering to do that?" "I am," Tanner said steadily. "I know we just met, and you have no reason to trust me. But I also know what it is like to be trapped in your own mind, and I would not wish that on anyone." Clara thought about the long night stretching ahead, about the exhaustion that was slowly destroying her. She thought about Tanner's patience with Nightingale, his understanding of trauma and healing. "I do trust you," she said quietly. "I do not entirely understand why, but I do." "Then let me help," Tanner said. "Tonight, you try to sleep, and I will stay awake. I will keep watch. If you have nightmares, I will wake you. If danger comes, I will handle it. All you have to do is rest." Clara felt tears on her cheeks. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because someone did it for me once," Tanner said simply. "After the war, I worked for a man who found me half dead from exhaustion on the road. He took me in, gave me a place to sleep, and for the first month, he sat outside my door every night so I could feel safe enough to rest. He saved my life. Maybe I can help save yours." Clara wiped her eyes. "What do we do?" "Go back to your room and lie down," Tanner said. "Leave the door open a crack. I will sit in the hallway where you can see me if you open your eyes. Knowing I am there might be enough to let you sleep." It seemed impossible, but Clara was desperate enough to try anything. She returned to her room and lay down on the bed, her heart pounding. Through the partially open door, she could see Tanner settling against the opposite wall, his long legs stretched out before him. He caught her eye and nodded reassuringly. Clara closed her eyes. The familiar anxiety surged, but instead of fighting it, she focused on Tanner's presence in the hallway. He was keeping watch. She was safe. She could rest. The words became a mantra, repeated over and over as she forced her breathing to slow. She did not expect it to work, so she was shocked when she opened her eyes to find sunlight streaming through her window. She had slept, not deeply, not peacefully, but she had slept for what must have been several hours. Clara sat up quickly and looked toward the door. Tanner was gone, but a folded blanket on the hallway floor showed where he had been. Clara dressed quickly and went downstairs. Martha was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Clara said truthfully. "I am glad to hear it. Breakfast will be ready shortly." Martha glanced at her. "Tanner was up early this morning. Said he had horses to work with, but he looked tired himself." Guilt stabbed through Clara. Tanner had sacrificed his own sleep to help her. She would have to thank him, though she was not sure words could adequately express her gratitude. After breakfast, Clara settled into the office to begin learning the ranch's bookkeeping system. The work was detailed but not difficult, and she found herself absorbed in the neat columns of numbers and the careful records Martha had kept. It felt good to have a purpose, something to focus on besides her own fears. At noon, she took a break and walked outside. The day was warm for September, the sun bright in a cloudless sky. She saw Tanner in one of the corrals, working with a young sorrel horse. The animal was nervous, shying away from his approach, but Tanner moved with the same patient grace she had seen with Nightingale. Clara watched from outside the fence. Tanner acknowledged her presence with a slight nod, but continued his work. He spoke softly to the horse, his voice too low for Clara to make out words, and gradually the sorrel began to relax. After perhaps 20 minutes, the horse allowed Tanner to approach and touch its shoulder. "You have a gift," Clara said when Tanner finally stepped away from the animal. "Not a gift," Tanner said, climbing over the fence. "Just patience and understanding. Most problem horses are not really problems. They are just scared or have been treated badly." He wiped sweat from his forehead. "How did you sleep?" "I slept," Clara said, still marveling at the fact. "Not perfectly, but I slept. Thank you for what you did." "No, thanks needed," Tanner said. "Will you need help again tonight?" Clara hesitated. She did not want to burden him, but the thought of facing another sleepless night alone filled her with dread. "Yes," she admitted quietly, "if you are willing." "I am," Tanner said. "Same arrangement as last night. You rest, I keep watch." The days fell into a pattern. Clara spent her mornings working on the ranch books, her afternoons walking the property or watching Tanner work with the horses, and her evenings sharing meals with the Hendersons and ranch hands. At night, Tanner would position himself outside her door, and Clara would lie down, knowing he was keeping watch. Slowly, painfully slowly, she began to sleep for longer stretches. After a week, she managed 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep. After 2 weeks, 6 hours. The nightmares still came, but when they did, Tanner would hear her distress and quietly call her name until she woke. His presence became a lifeline, proof that she was safe, that the danger had passed. During the days, Clara and Tanner began to spend more time together. He would explain his methods for working with the horses, and she would tell him about her childhood in Salt Lake City, about her parents and the life they had built. Tanner spoke rarely of his own past, but gradually Clara pieced together a picture of a man who had seen too much violence during the war and had spent the years since seeking peace in the company of animals. "Why horses?" Clara asked one afternoon as they sat on the corral fence together, watching Nightingale graze peacefully. "Because they are honest," Tanner said. "A horse cannot lie to you. If it is afraid, you know it. If it trusts you, you know that too. There is no pretense, no manipulation. Just pure, honest reaction." He paused. After spending years in the war where everyone lied and every word could be a trap, that honesty was healing. "I understand that," Clara said. "I find myself questioning everything now, wondering if the world was always this dangerous and I simply did not see it before." "The world contains both danger and beauty," Tanner said. "The trick is not letting the danger blind you to the beauty." Clara looked at him, at his weathered face and steady gray eyes. "When did you become so wise?" Tanner smiled slightly, a rare expression that transformed his usually serious face. "I am not wise. I am just old enough to have made a lot of mistakes and learned from them." "You are not that old," Clara protested. "What are you, 28? 29? Tanner corrected. And some days, I feel twice that age. Clara felt a strange flutter in her chest. She had grown accustomed to Tanner's presence, had come to rely on it, but lately she found herself noticing other things. The way his hands moved with such careful strength, the rare smile that softened his features, the kindness that seemed as much a part of him as his quietness. She was falling in love with him, she realized with a start. The knowledge both thrilled and terrified her. As October arrived, the aspens on the mountains turned gold and the nights grew colder. Clara now slept for 8 hours most nights, though she still needed Tanner's presence to feel safe. They had developed a comfortable routine, and the other ranch hands seemed to accept Tanner's nightly vigil without comment. One evening, after a particularly good day where Clara had managed to laugh at one of the ranch hands' jokes, Martha pulled her aside. "You look so much better than when you arrived," she said warmly. "There is color in your cheeks again, and you do not have that haunted look in your eyes." "I feel better," Clara admitted. "The work helps, and the fresh air. Being here has given me space to heal." Martha glanced toward where Tanner was washing up for supper. "Tanner has been good for you too," she said gently. "Henry and I have noticed how much time you two spend together." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He has been very kind, helping me with my sleeping troubles." "It is more than kindness," Martha said. "That young man looks at you like you are the sunrise after a long night." She patted Clara's arm. "Do not be afraid of happiness, dear. I know you have been through terrible things, but that does not mean you do not deserve joy." Clara thought about Martha's words as she ate supper. She watched Tanner from across the table, studying the way he listened carefully to others' conversations, the way he ate methodically, as if each meal was something to be grateful for. He was a good man, possibly the best man she had ever known. But was she ready for the feelings growing in her heart? That night, as Tanner settled into his usual position outside her door, Clara found herself unable to lie down. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bed, gathering her courage. "Tanner," she called softly. He appeared in the doorway immediately. "Is something wrong?" "No," Clara said. "I just wanted to talk, if that is all right." Tanner leaned against the doorframe, giving her his full attention. "Of course." Clara took a breath. "You have done so much for me these past weeks. You have sacrificed your own sleep, your own comfort, to help me heal. I need you to know how much that means to me." "You do not need to thank me," Tanner said. "Let me finish," Clara said gently. "The thing is, I have come to depend on your presence, but not just because it helps me sleep. I have come to value your company during the days as well. Your conversation, your perspective, your kindness." She met his eyes. "I have come to care for you a great deal, and I think you might care for me too, but I need to know if I am reading the situation correctly." Tanner was silent for a long moment. Then he stepped into the room, closing the distance between them, but still maintaining a respectful space. "You are reading it correctly," he said quietly. "I have cared for you since that first night in Park City when you stood by the corral looking so lost. These weeks here have only deepened those feelings." Clara's heart raced. "Then why have you not said anything?" "Because you were healing," Tanner said simply. "You needed a friend and a protector, not a suitor. I did not want to complicate your recovery with my own feelings." He paused. "But if you are asking whether I think of you as more than a friend in need of help, then yes. I think of you constantly. I watch for you during the day, listen for you at night. You have become essential to me in ways I did not expect." Clara stood, moving closer to him. "I am still healing," she said honestly. "I still have nightmares sometimes, still struggle with fear, but I am also alive, and I am beginning to remember what it feels like to want things, to hope for things, and I hope that you and I might be able to build something together." Tanner reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, reverent. "I would like that very much." Clara leaned into his touch, feeling the warmth of his palm against her cheek. "Will you still keep watch while I sleep?" "For as long as you need," Tanner promised. "And then, when you no longer need me to stand guard, perhaps I can sleep beside you instead." The words sent a shiver through Clara, but it was not fear. It was anticipation, hope for a future she had thought lost to her. "I think I would like that," she whispered. Tanner smiled, the expression transforming his face. Then, moving slowly, he leaned down and kissed her forehead. It was chaste, respectful, but it carried the promise of more to come. "Sleep now," he said softly. "I will be right outside." Clara lay down, her heart full in a way it had not been since before her parents died. She closed her eyes, and, for the first time, the darkness did not seem so frightening. She slept peacefully, dreaming of golden aspen leaves and patient hands gentling a frightened horse. The next weeks brought changes to the ranch as everyone prepared for winter. Cattle were moved to lower pastures, supplies were stocked, and repairs were made to buildings before the heavy snows arrived. Clara worked longer hours on the books, making sure all accounts were settled before winter isolated them. Tanner continued his work with the problem horses, making remarkable progress with each one. Nightingale had transformed from a dangerous, unpredictable animal into a calm, reliable mount. The sorrel had overcome its fear of humans. Even a stubborn gray gelding that had refused to be shod for over a year now stood quietly for the farrier. Henry was so impressed that he offered Tanner a permanent position. "I have never seen anyone with your skill," Henry said at supper one night. "If you stayed on, we could start breeding horses specifically for gentling and selling them at premium prices. There is a real market for well-trained mounts." Tanner glanced at Clara before responding. "I would need to think about it," he said carefully. "I have been a drifter for a long time. Settling in one place is a big decision." "I understand," Henry said, "but the offer stands. Talk it over and let me know what you decide." Later that night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Clara broached the subject. "Are you considering staying?" "That depends," Tanner said. "Are you planning to stay?" Clara thought about it. She had come to love the ranch, the work, the peace of the mountains. But more than that, she had found safety here, and the beginnings of happiness. "I think I am," she said. "Unless you were planning to leave, in which case I might have to reconsider." Tanner turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious in the starlight. "I want to stay," he said. "I want to build something here, something permanent, but only if you are part of it." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time. "I want that too." Tanner took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Then we stay together." As October turned to November, the first snow fell on the mountains. Clara stood at her window watching the white flakes drift down, remembering how different she had felt just 2 months ago. The nightmares still came occasionally, but they were less frequent now, less vivid. More importantly, they no longer controlled her life. Tanner still kept watch outside her door most nights, though sometimes now they would sit together on her bed, talking until she grew sleepy. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, content to let their relationship develop at its own pace. One particularly cold night in mid-November, Clara woke from a nightmare to find Tanner already in her room, kneeling beside her bed with his hand on her shoulder. "You are safe," he said quietly. "You are here at the ranch. The danger is past." Clara clutched his hand, her heart racing. "They were so real," she gasped. "I could see their faces, hear the gunshots." "I know," Tanner said, "but it was just a memory, not the present. You are safe here with me." Clara sat up, still shaking. Without thinking, she wrapped her arms around Tanner's neck, needing his solid presence to anchor her. He held her carefully, one hand stroking her back in soothing circles. "I am sorry," Clara whispered against his shoulder. "I thought I was getting better." "You are getting better," Tanner assured her. "Healing is not a straight line. There will be setbacks, but that does not erase your progress." Clara pulled back to look at him. His face was shadowed in the dim moonlight, but she could see the concern in his eyes, the care. Acting on impulse, she leaned forward and kissed him. For a moment, Tanner froze. Then he responded, his lips gentle against hers. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Clara admitted. "So have I," Tanner said, his voice rough. "But I wanted you to be ready." "I am ready," Clara said. "Not for everything, not all at once, but for this, for us." She took his hand. "Would you stay? Just for tonight, would you sleep here beside me? I think I would rest better with you close." Tanner hesitated, clearly torn between desire and propriety. "Clara, If anyone knew, your reputation would be ruined. I do not care about reputation, Clara said. I care about healing and about being with someone who makes me feel safe and valued and alive. She squeezed his hand. Please, I am not asking for anything improper. I just do not want to be alone. Tanner studied her face in the moonlight, then nodded slowly. All right, but I stay on top of the covers and we both remain fully clothed. Agreed, Clara said, smiling despite the lingering fear from her nightmare. Tanner lay down beside her, and Clara curled against his side, her head on his shoulder. His arm came around her, holding her securely. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and the sound was more soothing than any medicine. Thank you, she whispered. Always, Tanner replied, and Clara closed her eyes, feeling safer than she had in months. She slept through the rest of the night without dreams. When morning came, Tanner slipped out before anyone else woke, preserving Clara's reputation. But something had shifted between them. They had crossed an invisible line, moving from friendship into something deeper, more intimate. Martha noticed the change. You are glowing, she told Clara a few days later. Love suits you. Clara blushed but did not deny it. Tanner is a good man. The best, Martha agreed. Henry thinks the world of him, and I have grown quite fond of him myself. If things continue in this direction, we would be happy to see you two make it official. We have not talked about marriage, Clara said quickly, though her heart skipped at the word. Give it time, Martha said with a knowing smile. But I have watched you two together. That man is planning a future with you, whether he has said so or not. Clara hoped Martha was right. The thought of a future with Tanner filled her with a warm anticipation that pushed back the lingering shadows of her past. As November progressed toward December, the ranch settled into the quieter rhythms of winter. The cattle required less daily management, and the horses needed less training as they adapted to the cold weather. Clara's work in the office continued, but the pace was less frantic. She and Tanner spent their free time together, walking through the snow-covered landscape, talking about everything and nothing. Tanner told her more about his childhood in Missouri, about parents who had died when he was young, and an older brother who had raised him. The brother had died in the war, and Tanner had no other family. We are alike in that way, Clara said, both alone in the world. Not alone, Tanner corrected, taking her hand. Not anymore. One evening in mid-December, Tanner asked Clara to walk with him after supper. They bundled up against the cold and headed out into the clear night. The moon was bright, reflecting off the snow and turning the landscape into something magical. Tanner led Clara to the corral where Nightingale stood, her black coat gleaming in the moonlight. The mare whickered at their approach, and Tanner stroked her neck affectionately. I remember the first time I saw you, Tanner said. You were standing right here, watching me work with Nightingale. You looked so lost, so tired, and all I wanted was to help you. You did help me, Clara said. You saved me, in every way a person can be saved. Tanner turned to face her fully. You saved yourself, he said firmly. You had the courage to accept help, the strength to keep trying even when it seemed impossible. All I did was stand watch. You did more than that, Clara insisted. You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me that healing was possible, that life could be good again. Tanner reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Clara's breath caught. I know we have not known each other long, Tanner said, and I know you were still healing from terrible trauma, but I also know that I love you, Clara Foster. I love your strength and your vulnerability, your kindness and your determination. I love the way you throw yourself into new challenges, the way you care for others even when you are hurting. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond. This was my mother's ring, Tanner said. It is all I have left of my family, and I would be honored if you would wear it. Clara, will you marry me? Clara felt tears streaming down her cheeks. 3 months ago, she had thought her life was over, that she would never feel anything but fear and grief again. But here she stood, whole and healing, with a man who understood her pain and loved her anyway. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, I will marry you. Tanner slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and passionate this time, a kiss that spoke of promises and futures and love that would last. Clara kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her hope and gratitude and love into the connection between them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and grinning like fools. "I love you," Clara said, the words feeling right and true. "I love you so much, Tanner Gaines." "I love you too," Tanner said, resting his forehead against hers. "And I promise I will spend every day showing you just how much." They walked back to the house, hand in hand, and when they told the Hendersons their news, Martha actually squealed with delight. "I knew it," she said, hugging them both. "Oh, this is wonderful news. We should have a party, a celebration." "Let us wait until spring," Clara suggested. "A spring wedding would be lovely." "Perfect," Martha agreed. "That gives us time to plan properly." That night, Tanner slept beside Clara again, and for the first time, she felt no fear at all. She was safe, loved, and looking forward to a future she had never dared imagine. The nightmares had not disappeared completely, but they held less power now. She had Tanner to anchor her, and her own growing strength to sustain her. The winter passed in a blur of contentment. Clara and Tanner spent their days working and their evenings planning their future. They talked about staying at the Rocking H permanently, about building a small house of their own on the property. Tanner would continue working with horses, and Clara would manage the ranch's business affairs. It was a good life, a simple life, but it was theirs. Henry and Martha were thrilled with the arrangement. "You two are family now," Henry said, "and family belongs here." As the snow began to melt in March, preparations for the wedding began in earnest. Martha threw herself into the planning with enthusiasm, arranging for a minister to come from Park City and inviting neighboring ranchers to the celebration. Clara made her own dress, simple but elegant, from fabric Martha had ordered special from Salt Lake City. Tanner spent his free time building furniture for the small cabin Henry had agreed to let them use. He worked with careful precision, crafting a bed frame, a table, chairs, and shelves. Each piece was made with love, and Clara would sometimes watch him work, marveling at the way his hands could be both strong and gentle. One evening in early April, about a week before the wedding, Clara and Tanner sat on the porch watching the sunset, paint the mountains pink and gold. Clara leaned against Tanner's shoulder, feeling peaceful and content. "I never thought I would feel this happy again," she said quietly. "After my parents died, I believed joy was something that had died with them. But you taught me that loss does not have to be the end of the story. You taught me things too," Tanner said. "You reminded me that opening your heart to someone is worth the risk, that love does not make you weak, but stronger." Clara turned to look up at him. "I still have bad nights sometimes," she admitted. "Nights when the memories come back strong." "I know," Tanner said, "and I will be there for every single one, for as long as you need me." "Forever, then," Clara said, smiling. "I will need you forever." "Good," Tanner said, kissing the top of her head. "Because forever is exactly how long I plan to stay." The wedding took place on a bright morning in late April. The aspens were just beginning to leaf out, painting the mountainsides in fresh green. Clara wore her new dress, her auburn hair arranged in elaborate curls by Martha's skilled hands. She carried a simple bouquet of wildflowers that Tanner had picked that morning. The ceremony was held outside, with the mountains as a backdrop. The minister from Park City presided, and all the ranch hands attended along with several neighboring families. Martha cried happy tears, and even Henry's eyes were suspiciously bright. Clara spoke her vows in a clear, strong voice, promising to love and honor Tanner through all the days of her life. Tanner's voice was equally steady as he pledged himself to her, promising to protect and cherish her, to stand by her side through whatever came. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Tanner kissed Clara with a tenderness that made her heart swell. The small gathering erupted in cheers and applause, and Clara laughed against Tanner's lips, feeling more joy than she had thought possible. The celebration lasted all afternoon. Martha had prepared an enormous feast, and there was dancing and music and laughter. Clara danced with Henry, with several of the ranch hands, and most of all with Tanner, who proved surprisingly graceful despite claiming he never danced. As the sun began to set, Clara and Tanner slipped away to their new cabin. Tanner carried her over the threshold, and Clara laughed at the traditional gesture. Inside, everything was ready for them. The furniture Tanner had built arranged perfectly, fresh flowers on the table, clean linens on the bed. "Welcome home, Mrs. Gaines," Tanner said, setting her down gently. "Home," Clara repeated, loving the sound of the word. "Yes, this is home." That night, they consummated their marriage with a gentleness and passion that left Clara breathless. Tanner was patient and careful, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Clara marveled at how far she had come. From the broken, terrified woman who could not sleep to this, a married woman in the arms of the man she loved felt like a miracle. "Thank you," she whispered against Tanner's chest. "For what?" he asked, his hand stroking her hair. "For keeping watch while I rested," Clara said. "For being patient while I healed. For loving me even when I was broken." "You were never broken," Tanner said firmly. "You were wounded, but that is different. Wounds heal, and you, my beautiful wife, are one of the strongest people I have ever known." Clara lifted her head to kiss him. "We are both strong now," she said. "Together, we can face anything." "Together," Tanner agreed, and held her close as they drifted into peaceful sleep. The months that followed were the happiest of Clara's life. She and Tanner settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked during the day, Tanner with the horses and Clara with the books, and spent their evenings together in their cabin, talking and laughing and planning their future. The nightmares became increasingly rare. When they did occur, Clara would wake to find Tanner already holding her, murmuring soothing words, until the fear passed. His presence remained her anchor, the thing that made her feel safe enough to surrender to sleep. In June, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She told Tanner one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Tanner went very still, his gray eyes searching her face. "A baby?" he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Clara said. "Are you happy?" Instead of answering, Tanner pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he finally released her, there were tears on his cheeks. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said. "Clara, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, love, and now a family. I never dreamed I could have any of this, and you have given me all of it." Clara wiped his tears away, her own eyes wet. "We gave it to each other," she said. "We built this together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara continued working in the office until her growing belly made sitting at the desk uncomfortable, then switched to lighter tasks. Tanner was absurdly protective, hovering over her until she had to gently remind him she was pregnant, not fragile. Martha was thrilled at the prospect of a baby at the ranch. She dug out infant clothes she had saved from when her own children were small, and taught Clara how to knit blankets and booties. The ranch hands, rough men all, became surprisingly solicitous, offering to help Clara with any task that seemed remotely strenuous. In late February 1883, on a snowy afternoon when the world outside was white and pristine, Clara went into labor. Tanner paced the cabin like a caged animal, while Martha and a midwife from Park City attended to Clara. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Tanner, listening to Clara's cries from outside the bedroom, thought he might lose his mind with worry. But just as the sun was setting, a baby's cry pierced the air. Tanner rushed into the bedroom to find Martha cleaning a red-faced, squalling infant. "A boy," Martha announced with a huge smile. "A healthy baby boy." Clara lay exhausted against the pillows, but she was smiling. "Tanner, come meet your son." Tanner approached slowly, almost afraid to believe this was real. Martha placed the baby in his arms, and Tanner looked down at the tiny, perfect face. The infant had stopped crying and was staring up at him with dark, unfocused eyes. "He is beautiful," Tanner whispered, his voice breaking. "Clara, he is perfect." "We should name him," Clara said weakly. "What do you think of Thomas, after your brother?" Tanner looked at her with such love that Clara's breath caught. "Thomas," he repeated. "Thomas Henry Gaines. Yes, that is perfect." Little Thomas proved to be a good baby, sleeping well and eating heartily. Clara recovered from the birth quickly, and soon the cabin was filled with the sounds of infant coos and laughter. Tanner was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, teaching Thomas to recognize his voice and touch. "You are going to spoil him," Clara said one evening, watching Tanner rock the baby to sleep. "Impossible," Tanner said. "A child cannot be spoiled by love." Clara smiled, her heart full. She thought of her own parents, of how much they would have loved to meet their grandson. The pain of their loss would never fully disappear, but it had softened into something bearable, a bittersweet ache rather than a consuming agony. She could remember them now, with more joy than sorrow, could see their legacy in the life she had built. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the Rocking H prospered. Tanner's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and people came from as far as Colorado to buy horses he had gentled. Clara managed the expanding business with skill, keeping meticulous records and negotiating favorable contracts. When Thomas was 2 years old, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news felt less frightening and more like a natural progression. Their second child, a daughter they named Catherine Martha Gaines, arrived in the spring of 1885. She had Clara's auburn hair and Tanner's gray eyes, and she was adored from the moment she drew breath. "Two children," Tanner said one night as he stood watching both sleeping in their respective cribs. "I have two perfect children and the most amazing wife. How did I get so lucky?" "It was not luck," Clara said, coming to stand beside him. "It was choice. You chose to help a frightened woman you did not know. I chose to accept that help. We both chose to take a chance on love, when it would have been easier to stay guarded and alone." Tanner pulled her close. "Best choices I ever made." The years flowed past like water. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses as much as his father. Catherine was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees or exploring the mountains. A third child, another son named Henry after Mr. Henderson, arrived in 1888, and a fourth child, a daughter named Sarah, in 1891. Henry and Martha Henderson grew older, but remained active in the ranch's operation. When Henry's health began to fail in 1895, he called Tanner and Clara to his bedside. "This ranch has been my life's work," he said, his voice weak but determined. "But it is time to pass it on to the next generation. I want you two to take over the Rocking H. You have earned it 100 times over." "We cannot possibly accept," Clara protested, but Henry waved her objections away. "You already run most of it anyway," he said, "and there is no one I would trust more. Promise me you will keep it going, keep it thriving." "We promise," Tanner said solemnly, gripping Henry's hand. Henry died peacefully a week later, with Martha and his extended ranch family surrounding him. The funeral was well attended, a testament to how respected he had been. Martha stayed at the ranch, of course, taking on a grandmother role to Clara and Tanner's children that she embraced with joy. Under Clara and Tanner's management, the Rocking H continued to prosper. They expanded the horse breeding operation and added more cattle. The ranch became known throughout Utah and beyond for the quality of its livestock and the fairness of its dealings. But more than business success, the ranch became a home filled with love and laughter. The children grew strong and capable, learning the value of hard work and the importance of treating both animals and people with respect. Visitors to the Rocking H always remarked on the happiness that seemed to permeate the place, the sense that this was a family truly at peace. Clara never forgot the darkness she had emerged from. On quiet nights when Tanner was out checking on the horses and the children were asleep, she would sometimes sit on their porch and remember that terrified woman who could not sleep, who thought she would never be whole again. The memories of her parents' deaths had softened with time, becoming treasured reminders of their love rather than sources of pain. She had learned that healing was not about forgetting or erasing the past. It was about integrating the pain into the larger story of her life, letting it become part of her foundation rather than a weight that dragged her down. The accident had broken something in her, yes, but in the mending, she had become stronger than she ever was before. One evening in the summer of 1900, Clara and Tanner sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their children were scattered around the property, Thomas helping with the horses, Catherine reading to young Sarah, and Henry playing with the ranch dogs. At 52, Tanner's dark hair was threaded with silver, and at 40, Clara had laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of years of joy. "Do you remember that night in Park City?" Clara asked, taking Tanner's hand. "When I could not sleep and you found me by Nightingale's corral?" "I remember," Tanner said. "I remember thinking you looked like you were about to shatter into 1,000 pieces." "I felt like I was," Clara admitted. "I cannot imagine what would have happened to me if you had not offered to help." "You would have found another way," Tanner said confidently. "You are too strong to have let the darkness win." "Maybe," Clara said. But I am grateful I did not have to find out. I am grateful for every moment since that night, for every day we have had together. Tanner lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I am grateful too. You gave me a purpose beyond myself, a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a family, a home, a life worth living. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara thought about all the years behind them and all the years still to come, and she felt a profound sense of contentment. Thomas rode up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. At 17, he was the image of his father, tall and lean, with the same patient way with animals. Pa, Ma, you have to come see. That new filly we got last week, I just got her to eat out of my hand. She is going to be magnificent once she trusts us. Tanner grinned and stood, offering his hand to Clara. Shall we go admire our son's handiwork? Absolutely, Clara said, taking his hand and letting him pull her to her feet. As they walked toward the corral, surrounded by their children and the ranch they had built together, Clara felt a wave of gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She had survived unimaginable tragedy and emerged not just intact, but thriving. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with a man who understood that true strength sometimes meant asking for help. The nightmares were gone now, replaced by dreams of the future, of grandchildren, and continued prosperity and years of love still to come. She no longer needed someone to keep watch while she slept, but Tanner still held her every night, a habit neither wanted to break. His presence remained her greatest comfort, proof that even the darkest nights eventually gave way to dawn. That evening, after the children were in bed and the ranch was quiet, Clara and Tanner lay together in their bed, wrapped in each other's arms. I love you, Clara whispered into the darkness. Thank you for keeping watch all those years ago. I love you too, Tanner replied, kissing her forehead. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Keeping watch while you rested was the greatest privilege of my life. Clara smiled and closed her eyes, surrendering to sleep without fear, without hesitation, secure in the knowledge that she was loved, she was safe, and she had built a life more beautiful than any she could have imagined in those dark days after the accident. The past would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She was Clara Gaines, wife to Tanner, mother to 4 extraordinary children, co-owner of the thriving Rocking H Ranch, and she was, at last, completely and utterly at peace. The years continued to roll forward, bringing new joys and inevitable sorrows. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1902, and they buried her next to Henry on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built. The loss hit hard, but the family rallied together, supporting each other through the grief. Thomas married a kind-hearted woman named Eleanor in 1904, and they built a house on the far end of the ranch property. Catherine, always independent, decided to become a teacher and moved to Salt Lake City, though she visited often. Henry showed signs of his father's gift with horses, and at 16, he was already handling animals that stumped older, more experienced hands. Young Sarah, at 13, was developing her mother's head for business and often helped Clara with the ranch accounts. In 1906, Clara and Tanner celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary, with a party that brought together friends and family from across the territory. As Clara looked around at all the people whose lives had been touched by the ranch, by the work she and Tanner had done, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. We did well, she told Tanner, as they danced together under strings of lanterns hung between the barn and the house. We did more than well, Tanner replied. We built something that will last long after we are gone, a legacy of kindness and hard work and love. That night, as they prepared for bed, Clara caught sight of herself in the mirror. At 46, her auburn hair was liberally streaked with gray, and time had etched lines on her face. But her eyes were bright and clear, free of the haunted look that had defined them for so long after her parents' deaths. Do you know what I realized today? Clara said as Tanner joined her. I have been happy far longer than I was sad. The good years have outnumbered the bad by so much that sometimes I almost forget how dark things once were. That is how it should be, Tanner said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, so they were both reflected in the mirror. The darkness was real, but it was never meant to be permanent. You were always meant for this, for joy and love and a life well lived. Clara leaned back against him, studying their reflection. They had grown older together, had faced challenges and celebrated triumphs side by side. The young cowboy who had offered to keep watch and the traumatized woman who could not sleep had become partners in the truest sense, building a life neither could have created alone. "I would not change anything," Clara said softly. "Even the painful parts led me here, to you, to our children, to this life. I would not trade any of it." "Neither would I," Tanner said, kissing the side of her neck. "You are still the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Gaines." They went to bed together, as they had every night for over 2 decades, and Clara fell asleep immediately, peacefully, wrapped in the arms of the man who had taught her to rest without fear. Outside, the ranch lay quiet under a blanket of stars. The horses and cattle settled for the night, the future stretching out before them, full of promise and possibility. As 1910 arrived, bringing with it a new decade, Clara was 50 years old and Tanner 62. They had slowed down somewhat, leaving more of the daily ranch operations to Thomas and Henry, but they remained active and engaged. Clara still managed the books, and Tanner still worked with problem horses, though he chose only the most interesting cases these days. They had 6 grandchildren now, with more on the way, and the Rocking H had grown to encompass over 2,000 acres. It was one of the most successful ranches in Utah, but more importantly, it was still a place where family came first, where kindness mattered, where both animals and people were treated with respect. One spring evening, Clara and Tanner took a ride together, something they tried to do at least once a week. They rode to a spot high in the hills, where they could see the entire ranch spread out below them, the buildings and corrals, the pastures full of cattle and horses, the network of fences and roads they had built over the years. "Do you remember when we first came here?" Clara asked. "When I was so broken I could barely function, and you were just a drifter looking for work." "I remember," Tanner said. "I remember thinking the Hendersons were taking a chance on both of us, and hoping we would not let them down." "I think we exceeded their expectations," Clara said with a smile. "I think we exceeded our own expectations," Tanner replied. "I never dreamed I could have this kind of life. I thought I was destined to wander, never settling, never belonging anywhere. And I thought I was destined to live in fear," Clara said, "to let that one terrible event define the rest of my existence. But you showed me another way." Tanner reached over and took her hand. "We showed each other," he corrected. "You gave me as much as I gave you. You taught me that opening your heart is worth the risk, that love is not a weakness, but the greatest strength of all." They sat on their horses, hands clasped, watching the sun set over the ranch that had become their entire world. Clara thought about all the years behind them, about the children they had raised and the love they had shared. She thought about the young woman she had been, traumatized and terrified, and marveled at how far she had come. The accident that killed her parents would always be part of her story. The nightmares and the sleepless nights would always be part of her past, but they were just chapters in a much larger book, one filled with far more joy than sorrow, far more love than loss. She had survived, and more than survived, she had thrived. "Thank you," Clara said, squeezing Tanner's hand. "For that first night when you said you would keep watch while I rested. For every night since. For building this life with me." "The privilege was entirely mine," Tanner said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every moment with you has been a gift, Clara. Every single moment." As they rode back down to the ranch, Clara felt a peace so profound it seemed to radiate from her very core. She had been broken once, shattered by violence and loss, but in the healing, she had become something stronger and more beautiful than she ever was before. She had found love in the wilderness, had built a family and a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. That night, as Clara drifted off to sleep in Tanner's arms, she smiled. No nightmares waited for her now, only dreams of the future, of grandchildren growing up strong and kind, of the ranch continuing to prosper, of years of love still ahead. She slept deeply and peacefully, the sleep of someone who had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, who had learned that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and love and patience. Tanner watched her sleep, as he had so many nights over the years, though now it was out of love rather than vigilance. She no longer needed him to keep watch, but he did it anyway, treasuring these quiet moments when he could simply observe the woman who had changed his entire life. Clara had saved him just as surely as he had saved her, had given him purpose and family and a reason to build something lasting. As he finally allowed himself to sleep, Tanner sent a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had brought them together that night in Park City so many years ago. The terrified woman by the corral and the patient cowboy who offered to help had found something neither expected. A love that transformed them both. A partnership that created not just a successful ranch, but a true home. A legacy that would ripple forward through generations. The Rocking H Ranch continued to thrive under the Gaines family's stewardship, becoming known throughout the West as a place where horses were treated with kindness and business was conducted with integrity. Thomas and his brothers eventually took over completely, but they never forgot the lessons their parents had taught them, the importance of patience and compassion and treating every living thing with respect. Clara and Tanner lived long, happy lives, surrounded by children and grandchildren and the vast beauty of the Utah mountains. When Clara finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73, Tanner held her hand, whispering his love until her last breath. He followed her just 6 months later, as if unable to bear being separated from the woman who had been his partner, his love, his everything for over 4 decades. They were buried together on the hillside next to the Hendersons, their graves marked by simple headstones that bore their names and the years of their lives. But their real legacy was not in stone. It lived in the thriving ranch they had built, in the children and grandchildren who carried their values forward, in the countless horses and people whose lives had been touched by their kindness. Years later, great-grandchildren would play on that same hillside, would learn to ride horses in the corrals Tanner had built, would hear stories about the great-grandmother who overcame terrible trauma, and the great-grandfather who taught her to rest without fear. The story of Clara and Tanner became family legend, a tale of love born from darkness, of healing made possible through patience and devotion, of 2 wounded souls who found each other and built something beautiful from their shared pain. The land itself seemed to remember them, holding their love in the soil and stone, in the aspens that turned gold each autumn, and the mountains that stood eternal watch. The Rocking H remained a place of healing, where broken things could be made whole, where kindness was currency and love the greatest measure of success. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the mountains in shades of orange and gold, ranch workers swore they could feel a presence, peaceful and content, watching over the land with the same patient devotion that had defined Clara and Tanner's lives. Whether it was memory or spirit or simply the weight of all that love pressed into the earth, no one could say. But everyone agreed that the Rocking H was special, touched by something rare and precious, a place where 2 broken souls had once learned to be whole again, where a cowboy had kept watch while a frightened woman rested, and where love had proven stronger than any darkness the world could devise.